Hi, and welcome to this video tutorial which will show you how to set up the merchandising database that you will need for your piece of controlled assessment for GCSE ICT. Now, what you need to do, the first thing we need to do is look at the database we've got to set up, or what we need to do. Here is the standard analysis document which you should have a copy of, and you'll notice that it will tell you in here, without going into the specific details, it will tell you in here what fields will be in your database, and there's an important clue there which also tells you that you need to import something called a sales file. So you know in here that it's going to tell you the fields that your database needs and where the information is going to come from. That's going to be the data for your database, so the products that they're selling and the amount that they've got. Now you will need the sales file. You can find the sales file on Frog. Okay, the sales file is here. It says something called a CSV file. You can also download it as a text file. It's the same information, and the method of setting the database up is exactly the same. So you need to make sure that you have downloaded a copy of that. Your teacher might have sent it to you via Google Classroom. Now, we are going to go through the process of setting a database up, but we are not going to use that table. Because this is a controlled assessment, I can't just do a walkthrough, so I will use a similar file and show you how you would approach the problem using a different set of data. Okay, so the process of what you're doing is exactly the same, but it just makes use of different data. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Access. And by the way, this is at the point that I should remind you about your implementation log. You need to create a document alongside all the work you do in which you include screenshots of what you've done. So each job that you do in your coursework needs to have screenshot evidence. So setting up the database, producing queries, building the website, all of that good stuff needs to be recorded in an implementation log. So don't forget to take screenshots of this process as you go through it. You won't be able to do that later on, or it's going to be very, very difficult if you've done the work and forgotten to take the screenshots. So you can see here that the top option we've got is to create a blank desktop database, and that's what we're going to do. Okay, so we begin here with an empty database, and often when we usually create a database, what we're able to do is put in the fields ourselves and then add the data in ourselves. But it's much more efficient in this case to import the data that we've already got, because it will give us the structure of the database already set up. So when I start my blank database, all I will then need to do is go over to the left here where I've got the tables that my database contains. At the moment it's just got one empty table called Table 1. That contains no fields and no data. If I right click on Table 1 and I go Import, I have an option then to import some data into my database to pre-generate it. So I could use a text file, I could use an Excel spreadsheet. Remember, you've got both an Excel CSV file and a text file ready, and you can choose which one you're going to use. The method is exactly the same. So I'm going to show you how this would work. I'm going to use the superhero database to model this process. So I'm going to click text file. Then it will ask me to select where the data is going to come from, and I've downloaded it already, and I'm going to choose this top option to import the data into a new table. So I click browse, and then I need to navigate to the folder where I have all of my files. So here is my file, characters. That's the one I'm using for the superhero database. You should not use this one. You would use sales file CSV or sales file text. So I double click on that one and then I click OK. Now notice what it's done already. It's straight away recognized all the data that was contained in that file, and it's got all the data on the superheroes that we've used in the superhero database. There's an option at the top which we can set to delimited, because we're going to have commas between each field, so just leave that top option ticked like that one. Next. Again, you should see this option then, and you want the delimiter that separates your file, set that to comma. This box is really important. The first row contains the field names. If you don't tick this, then Access will not know what the names of the fields are and it won't work. So you must tick that. And now you notice it's picked out from the database. I've got a name, number of powers, role, cost to insure, ability, and all those other fields that we've looked at before when we've done the practice. Okay, so now I can click Next. And then I can specify information about the fields that I'm importing. Now you could do this now, or we could do it later on, and I think what we'll really do is we'll look at changing the nature of the fields later on when we've imported the data, but you can actually change how the fields are set up. We won't do that now. We'll click Next, and then this will then ask you if you want to define a primary key, and you do want to define a primary key. Now in this database it's already got a field, you can see they're called ID, with an ID number for each of the superheroes. So I don't need another one. You may not have an ID field, in which case you should do the top option to let Access add the primary key. As I've already got one, I'm just going to go choose my primary key and choose ID. But remember, you may not necessarily have that option with your data. So don't get this bit wrong. So I've chosen my primary key, which is ID, and then I click Next. And then I can choose the name of my table. Now you need to give the table a sensible name. I would call it a name that describes what the data represents. So banned merchandise or merchandising or something like that. For me, I'm going to call it superheroes. And then I'm going to click Finish. I don't want to save the import steps, so I'll just close it. And now what you should see is I've got a table called Superheroes has appeared in my database. If I click Superheroes, there I have a complete set of data, and I've correctly entered all of the fields, all been brought in automatically. How much quicker is that than setting the database up manually? Now, the last point, the last thing to remember, you may need to add additional fields to your database that aren't already created. You may not need to. You may have discussed this with your IT class and your ICT teacher, and you may have decided that you need to add an additional field. So for instance, in my database, I might want to have another field which will be appearance fee that I want to add to my database. So I would then go to click to add, and then I could decide on the type of field that I was going to add. Now, because mine's a fee, I'm going to choose a currency field, and I'm going to call it appearance fee, like that. You aren't going to call yours appearance fee. You're going to choose, if necessary, an appropriate field to add for your own database. That should be that. You should now have successfully created a database and added any additional fields that you need. It's now up to you to work out, and we'll look at this in another video, how to change any validation, add things like drop-down menus if you want to add drop-down menus, and if you're going to need to do anything like calculated fields. That will appear in a second video. You might want to do this video as a dry run. You might want to do this process as a dry run with the superhero database like I have, and then do it with the merchandising database, making sure, as I've said, that you take regular screenshots which you can annotate later on. So I hope that's been a helpful video. It's been quite long. You might want to go back, watch bits of it again, just to make sure that you understand. So good luck, and don't forget to take those screenshots.